Today we're talking about reputation in the age of AI and how comms teams get ahead of fragmentation before it turns into the story. Now, I spend most of my week with comms leaders in tech, policy and enterprise, watching how AI is changing reputation in real time. And here's the problem. Most companies don't have one reputation. They've got a few, different audiences and different stories. Now, AI pulls it into one answer. Buyer asks, investor asks, regulator asks, a grad asks, they all get the same thing. A neat little summary, no nuance, no context. So whose version of you is it actually using? My guest is Katie King, AI strategist and author who advises global organisations across all sectors. She's also very helpfully got a background in communications herself. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you for having me, Steph.
So let's start by talking about the fact that reputation, it's not a new thing for reputation to be fragmented. You know, communications directors might not say it out loud, but they always know that an investor story might be different from what you say to a potential graduate. You might have, your employer brand message is very different from what you might say to potential employees. So fragmentation isn't a new thing, but what do you think's really changed?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, Steph. I'd say the biggest change is the intermediary.
Yeah.
That's what's changed. So imagine it, like the home, you've got all these different silos, you've got all these different rooms where you've got your different segments, you've got your different audiences. But I think what AI has become is that new single front door that everyone is going through. So, the contradictions that may have sat in the different silos, AI can surface all of those.
And when that AI is actually giving that one answer about your organisation or your executive, what's it doing with all these different versions? Is it averaging them? Is it picking the loudest? Is it choosing from what's newest? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a technologist, but I've been in tech for 35 years and I've written these 3 books on AI. But my understanding is that the AI isn't averaging those reputations. It's favouring content that's much more recent, that's much more, credible from the right kind of sources. So it's finding all of that, finding those things that are, semantically consistent as well. So before we would be able to hide what we might be saying in our annual report through our CEO and then what might be being said by our marketing director, we would be packaging those up for those different audiences. Whereas now the AI might surface all of those from multiple different sources and not know necessarily who's going to, ask those. So I think the key there really for the comms directors, for the whole PR, marketing, CX, all the teams is that consistency.
Yeah.
We can't hide anything.
No.
It's all out there and can be found. And we've got to make sure our messages are consistent across the different channels.
Absolutely. So it's like fragmentation almost used to be manageable because our audiences were really separated and now they're not. Yeah. So that's pretty fair.
But I think it's also worth stating here that the AI isn't kind of managing, it isn't judging, it can't kind of like manage that for us. It's finding patterns.
Yeah.
So we're talking about big data. We're talking about the large language models being able to find those patterns.
Yeah.
And very, very clever, but changing the game as far as the kind of job that we all have to do.
Yeah. So given all of that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what changes that means for communications directors today. So if AI is collapsing audiences essentially, what are the changes in how our comms team needs to be run?
That's a really good question. I think I look at, particularly in the last book, which came out in November, lots of different sources. And I quote in the book the Boston Consulting Group, who talk about the 10, 20, 70 rule, where you've got 10% of it is what's happening with with the algorithm. You've then got that 20%, which is the data. The big bit is the people. So I think it's making sure that we're understanding from everything from the way we are strategizing to the way that we are prompting the tools to the way that we're intervening, the way that we are segmenting our audiences. I think that's all changed. So it's making sure that we are aligned around what all these changes actually mean, and that on the one hand, we can't trust it. We might get an incredible 70% ready draft of, I don't know, whether it's a press release or an annual report and so on. So making sure that we know how to get the best, that we wear the different hats and get the right kind of, strategies from that.
Definitely, because I think that, in the olden days, 2 years ago, if you looked at buying decisions or, be that on a consumer basis or B2B basis, it would often start with, you would do a web search, wouldn't you? You would gather your information. It would start with a conversation or, as I said, at least, a visit to a website. And now it often starts with that AI summary. So what have you seen in what are the best teams doing to make sure that AI summary is bang on and is going to lead to the right decisions for an organisation?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what you're also touching on briefly there is, what are they doing to scale it?
Yes.
So I'm seeing loads of examples of great work and little pilots and so on. I'd say three things. I'd say the first is that they're actually auditing their AI footprint, whether that's Claude, Perplexity, seeing what comes back, kind of like understanding, what is it that we've got and what we need and what sort of feedback we're getting. Second is identifying the really credible source materials as well. Again, that comes back to the prompt engineering bit of it, making sure we are pointing it in the right direction and clarifying what we need from it. And then the third thing is really sort of like prioritizing that anchor content. And making sure, again, that we are getting the right sort of high authority, credible sources to feature our material so that we are, feeding the AI engines.
So do you think that moves communications away from, campaigning through to more of a role of, establishing a baseline of credibility?
Yeah, it does. I think what happens with campaigns is that they are like episodic, they're one little piece of it. And I think the AI is ambient, the AI is continuous, the AI, you can't tell it, we briefed our shareholders this morning, that's what I want you to go and look at. It's sourcing it from all different areas. So I think it's constant. I think the job of a comms person, of a PR person today is very difficult. Yeah. Because we've got to be always on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, when we audit reputation at Cavendish, it's almost like the same fault lines appear really regularly. So whether that's policy versus marketing, corporate narrative versus executive voice, or employer brand versus employee experience, you see the same things coming up again and again. Where would you kind of push back, and what are we missing?
Yeah, that's quite detail there. So let's kind of like break those down. So I think the policy versus the marketing, that used to be much more manageable. I think, the regulator would read your submissions, your customer would see all of your different sorts of marketing. But, the AI doesn't understand those different packages.
Yes.
It sees the whole thing, and it can find overlap. It can find the meaning. So it's different to the days of search where it would be keywords.
Yes.
The AI can actually break that down. So if you've got something over here in an annual report and it's being contradicted by something else over here in a press release, the AI can actually surface that because it can find the meaning. And that's why it's so clever and also quite dangerous, but also there's a great opportunity for comms people as well. So I see kind of like multiple areas. So that's that piece. I think we've lost control. You know, when we
Yeah.
think about the corporate narrative versus the sort of executive voice, this is really accelerating.
Yeah.
And I think we have lost control because, you know, the AI tools are going to index the LinkedIn posts, the conference talks, the press coverage and so on. And, you know, we're asking our executives to go and build that authentic voice.
Yes.
You know, but it's tricky. It's
Yeah.
really difficult. So I think, you know, finding those kind of like human audiences and you know, the AI isn't going to make that distinction.
Yeah.
So yes, there's different reasons for doing it, and we want our execs to kind of be seen and to become those thought leaders, but the AI is going to merge all of that
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And what it throws up, it could end up throwing back some unusual mergers that weren't quite the meaning that we actually set out with. So
Yeah.
that in itself is a challenge. That
Yeah.
Not necessarily hallucinations, it could be, but a mash of something that ends up not quite having the meaning that we intended.
Yes, it's almost like the risk isn't that one version is wrong, it's that the AI has taken inconsistent
Absolutely.
messaging and stories, put them together, and that becomes the story, really, right?
Exactly. And we used to be in control, and we could say, right, that's for this audience. We don't now know because the
Yeah.
AI is the first place we're going to for that.
Yeah.
Rather than, of course, we look at trade press and we go to conferences. We still do all those things, but our first port of call might be an AI assistant.
Yeah.
And it might surface those from those multiple different inputs.
Absolutely. So let's, you know, everybody's talking about having a playbook for AI, right? And making it work. And they often talk about alignment, authority, and freshness or recency of information, all called different things according to different commentators. But let's talk about some of these in a little bit more detail. So on the idea of alignment, what do you think that looks like in practice, in terms of having the same terms, the same claims, the same proof points right across different functions? And who do you think actually owns it?
Good question. On the playbook, very briefly, I'm encouraging a lot of companies to create a playbook and to have AI champions drawn from different departments.
Yeah, nice.
Often it's led by comms,
Yeah.
by marketing, by digital, by whatever variant of that we're talking about. And that consistency, that alignment is really crucial for the reasons that we talked about previously, where, again, you've got a first port of call, whether it's Claude, Copilot, needing to surface some consistent messages, whether it's coming a query from a graduate looking to get a job with that firm, whether it's, you know, a potential investor, whoever it might be, a journalist and so on. So I think that alignment is absolutely crucial. And, you know, who actually owns that is a great question, and it will depend on the structure of that organization. I would say it needs to be quite strategic, but, and often many comms teams historically haven't been as strategic as they've needed to be, but that's changed, I'd say, in the last couple of years. So I think it's going to have to be quite senior, and it's going to have to be someone who has some oversight of all of those different areas where the communication is happening, whether that's corporate affairs, whether it's CMO, whether it's a comms director.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, moving on to authority, we all know that AI tends to trust very credible sources, what it cites to be credible sources. And in the public relations and communication space, that would appear to be great news for us, right? Because that's what we have traditionally done in terms of earned media, third-party credibility. But if you look at, you know, it kind of broadens the sphere of influence, if you like, because you can do peer review studies, you know, you've got traditional earned media, analyst work. If you had, you know, money to spend first or prioritise, where would you put it?
Yeah, I mean, the AI, it's an art at the moment that we don't know enough about, and it's evolving. I think that's the first thing to say. Nobody has all the answers, but I know that the AI is weighting the sources that have that perceived authority, but also recency.
Yes.
So I think we're having to mix up the credibility of having great editorial coverage in the right kind of places, but maybe our speakers being getting lots of engagement on their posts and so on, and having regular fresh content, but not at the expense of drowning everybody in the column inches, but again, quality and recency, which is a fine mix.
So when it comes to freshness or recency, as it's more commonly called, it's very much said that AI has got a recency bias. So what actually needs updating and how often? Because there's a lot.
There is. I think we've got to be careful not to churn material out that isn't quality material. And then we've got to think about, for example, if we're saying we want perceived authority and we're saying that's the FT, then is it going to be, round the clock FT digital content, or are we still thinking of, daily, or are we thinking about one of their raconteur reports? So the answer's again linked to the authority and the actual, the actual source, and so on. But I think we've just got to balance it with credible material rather than churning X number of press releases out. We've got to have quality material, but still have recency in the top of our minds, but updated bios really regularly, certainly every month or two, but regular fresh content going out over quality channels X number of times a day, LinkedIn posts 3 times a week if we've got a thought leader. So I think it's, there's no kind of absolutely right and wrong for every company, but I'd say they're the kinds of thumbnails, I would say.
So for many of our clients, we're running kind of at least fortnightly kind of signal reviews across different functions of the client business. Is that what you're seeing too? And what makes that cadence stick as opposed to kind of dying a slow death?
Yeah, I am seeing that, and I think it's a great way of doing it. And I think there are, I'd say, 2 or 3 things that really make it stick. Number one is having a named owner.
Yes.
We can't let that be delegated to a committee,
Yeah.
or it isn't going to happen. I think the second is having some sort of template for that, so that we've got, different questions that we're cycling regularly and so on, and not too sort of open-ended as well. And the third, maybe kind of fitting that into the rhythm that we've already got, because this AI shouldn't sort of change everything that we're doing, but like bolting that onto our comms planning meeting, for example. And I think that's how I would see that working.
Great. So this is all great, and we've talked a lot about things we should be doing to optimize AI and help manage communications. But there are some boundaries that we don't want to cross, and some potential pitfalls, I would say. And one of these is going to be the temptation to optimize everything for AI. So, flood, like you just said, flood the web with content, constantly updating, and really trying to game the signals that are out there. Where do you think the line is between fixing accuracy and gaming the system?
It's thinking about, not trying to manufacture something that isn't right.
Yes.
Actually updating content with accurate information is a legitimate thing to do.
Yes.
So I think we've got to make sure that we are, again, not falling down into a rabbit hole of trying to, fix everything. That's not going to happen. And then flooding our content with, trying to bury stories that don't fit our agenda.
Yeah, definite danger point. And it actually leads me quite nicely on to the next question that I'd love to get your thoughts on, which is AI during a crisis. So, if an AI summary is repeating something false or amplifying an allegation, what can communications teams do to handle that, but to ensure they're doing it responsibly?
Yeah, it's a really, really important thing for them to consider. I'd say there's a few, and I've been doing quite a bit of work on this, recently with PR agencies and directly with brands as well. So how are we going to make sure that we publish really authoritative corrections, on maybe a high authority channel? That's going to be really important, and doing that immediately. maybe getting the correction picked up by media sources is going to help filter that through the AI engine. So again, the role of the PR comms team is surfacing even more, much more strategic. Maybe updating those source of truth pages as well, and making sure that, that they've got all of the correct facts. It could be drawing from something, cached. And then whether that's the retrieval engines, the Perplexity and so on, making sure that we've got fresh material appearing within days. So, not too dissimilar to what we've tried to do in the past with search engine optimization. This is answer engine optimization. It's the same kind of, it's a different process. The idea is the same, but these are very, very smart tools, and we can't pull the wool over anybody's eyes with this. Authenticity, truth will prevail, basically.
So let's move on to, immediacy and immediate actions. So if a comms director has got 60 minutes this week, what's the order of operations? So I'd probably say, number one, test 10 real stakeholder questions across all AI tools, for example. See what comes back, take a call on it. Number two, ensure you are trying to spot the top contradictions and assign an owner to each to get it sorted out.
Yeah.
And thirdly, I'd probably say fix one source of truth page. Make sure it's there. You've got one consistent executive point of view that can be referenced and picked up, and then start again.
Yeah,
retest
it's great advice. Really good advice. So I would say absolutely test the tools. Look at your company, look at its competitors, find, where those queries lie, where are the gaps and so on. That is absolutely crucial. The second one, it's thinking about how do we prioritize that by the impact of certain stakeholders, I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
And what's the kind of gap, what's the brand gap there? How are we going to identify that? I think, the third one you mentioned, fix like one of those pages, find out what our brief actually is, find out what AI is saying about that company, and, absolutely get that right. I would add another one, which is actually maybe sort of like documenting those findings and sharing it, maybe with peers. It might be with your investor relations team, with your HR team, and making sure that cross-functional conversation is happening.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think, again, it's making sure that the comms team realise that they're not in isolation here.
Yeah.
That what's being said over there in the different teams is all feeding the same engines, and making sure again that, we're all on the same page, and that we're all getting the right kind of training, that we all understand the best prompts and so on.
Yeah, great addition, and great, very valid point there. So last one, if the same said comms director literally has 5 minutes with their CEO this week, what's the one line that you want them to say about AI and reputation?
Yeah. Oh, it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's making sure that they understand that every stakeholder that matters to the business is getting the story right. Yeah. Getting that right version out there. They're clear what that actual story is. So again, it's not just thinking about the PR spokespeople, but all the different teams. And that's brilliant, because they then realise, the way I look at it is all of us have to move up the food chain. So the comms team, the PR team move up the food chain. They become much more strategic. They're at the right-hand side of the CEO, but they have that real view that we are multi-department and we must interact and collaborate. So I think it's making sure that they, are responding to that and really interacting with all of them. Definitely.
Well, Katie, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much. Really interesting discussion today.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me. Yeah, no, really important points that you've raised, and I think really important advice. And what I would say is it's being on a journey of constantly learning. So I may have written 3 books on this, but I am learning every single day and trying new things and seeing what works and new prompts, new tools, and so on. So don't be frightened of it. Get your head around it. Be strategic, embrace it. And you're not alone. You need to work with your different departments to make sure that this really, you're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
So, Katie, thank you. That was brilliant. If you're a comms director wrestling with this, it's exactly the kind of work we do at Cavendish. You can find me on LinkedIn at Steph MacLeod or via the Cavendish Consulting website. I genuinely love to hear what's breaking first in your world and how you're managing or not reputation in the age of AI.